Bullying is child abuse by children. This is the one idea I want you to leave here with today. This is my contribution to this whole subject, because I think this is one of the deficiencies that is not recognized, and one of the reasons bullying is not being handled in a way that will at least reduce it, if not eliminate it. To help you remember this idea, I've had electrostatic decals made, which I believe there is one in every one of your packets. So if you look in the front of the front pocket on the left-hand side, you will see this decal. It's electrostatic, so you can put it on the window of your car, and I would suggest the rear window on the passenger side, either high or low, so the cars behind you can read it, and so anybody walking on the curb can see it, because in my view, we need to get this message out, that bullying is in fact child abuse by children. And if we don't allow adults to abuse children, why do we allow children to abuse children, thereby learning to abuse as a method of control? If you don't wish to use the decal, you can leave it on the outside. The staff will pick it up, and we can use it for future sessions of this kind. Isn't that fancy? This is my second attempt at PowerPoint. There are 4 major points I would like you to take away with you as well. First, bullying affects millions of children annually. We're not just talking about the unfortunate tragic cases of Phoebe Prince and others who commit suicide. Those are only the tip of the iceberg. It actually affects millions of children. Current practices of school boards and educators and parents actually teach children that bullying is okay. To change this, we must change our thinking to bullying is child abuse by children. It affects millions of children. And it starts in preschool, not in high school or middle school. There are 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds who begin to exclude other children. They don't pick them to be on their team. They single them out as somehow different. And it seems that other children pick up on those signals because they've already been singled out as different, and they begin to shun them. So it starts very early. We need to get the preschool children or the preschool teachers involved in this as well. 1 of 3 children surveyed in a recent survey reported being bullied in the previous year. So think about your class or your school. If 1 of 3 children has been bullied, is that something you're satisfied with? What can you do to change all of that? There was a study done by one of the originators of the anti-bullying program that found that children with bullying problems at age 8 are 6 times more likely to be convicted of a crime by age 24. So allowing children to be bullies is setting them up for the next generation of criminal behavior. An NEA study showed that 160,000 children stay home from school on any given day out of fear of being bullied at school. And of those who do go to school that have been bullied, their minds are preoccupied, worried about what's going to happen to them in the hall between classes or in the restroom or in the cafeteria or on the buses. So if their mind is preoccupied with that worry, it obviously is not concentrating on the content you're trying to teach them? Does this help to explain the achievement deficits that we see? And perhaps government efforts to improve achievement would be better served by eliminating the bullying. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this comes out of my clinical background. As was indicated, for 29 years I've been a therapist dealing with depression and anxiety as well as other kinds of things. Bullying has lifelong consequences, one of which is depression, and depression is a major mental illness. It is not something that can be overcome easily. In fact, among the handouts is one from a hospital, I believe, giving the symptoms of depression in teenagers. So I'm just going to give you a brief review of some of the facts. Depression is not sadness. It is a pervasive mental illness that is actually the stress response, the fight or flight response, stuck in the on position. The person needs to fight or needs to flee, but can't for whatever. In the case of children, obviously, they want to fight, but either they don't know how, or they feel incompetent, or they're not able. And they can't certainly flee. They flee by staying home from school. They flee in their minds by not paying attention to what's going on. But meanwhile, the body is churning out chemicals that are going to be dangerous. And this fight or flight response stems from feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. So imagine you're one of those children who's been bullied, and you can't do anything about it. You certainly are going to feel helpless and hopeless. And then that leaves you with this crippling sense of powerlessness to do anything about it. No one is helping you. The teachers aren't helping you. Your parent is unable to help you. The parent goes to school and the administration looks the other way and does nothing about it. So there's no one to help this poor, innocent child deal with it. It's a serious mental illness because the latest research indicates that depression permanently damages brain nerve cells, permanently, making managing their moods thereafter difficult. A number of years ago, I attended a seminar on this because it is one of my areas of expertise, that if you get depressed once in your lifetime, you're 50% likely to get it a second time. If you get it a second time, you're 80% likely to get it a third time. If you get it a third time, you're 95% likely to get it a fourth time, and you may as well stay on the medication as a prophylactic, as a preventive of recurrence. So it is a recurrent problem because you are damaging the nerve cells. It's a leading cause of disability in the world, according to the World Health Organization. It is as serious an illness as any physical illness. In fact, we finally got a law passed in Congress to make health insurance pay for treatment of mental illness on the same basis as treatment of physical illness, because there used to be limits, 20 sessions a year or 10 sessions a year, but we don't have 10 sessions for people with cancer. And finally, it is contagious in the fact that it affects all those close to the sufferer. And the same World Health Organizations indicate it's going to move from the fourth most serious illness to the second most serious illness, probably within the next 10 years. So depression is a very serious illness. It is one of the major consequences of being bullied, and that's affecting millions of children annually. Among the depression consequences as children, we've already talked about the avoidance of school or their poor performance if they're there. In some cases, as you know, it turns into rage, and particularly depression in boys or males tends to move toward an anger, acting out. So the anger and rage leads to various forms of violence, often suicide. Twice as many boys commit suicide as girls. or it leads to homicide, the school shootings, whether it's Columbine or it's the university locations that we've heard more recently. In adults, of course, the anger is still there, and it may lead to road rage or homicide in the workplace, as well as the adult students in university settings. One of the things we don't ever hear about is the fact that people with mental illness, including depression, have lower earnings throughout their lifetime. Here's a table that shows, in a 2003 study, healthy men earning $55,000, depressed men earning $28,000 on an annual basis. So we have a 49% difference, and in women with a similar kind of thing, 28 to 17, with a 39% discrepancy. Overall, then, in that study, they were estimating $193 billion less earned. So what is the impact on those families? That's why I'm talking about it as contagious. It affects those families because obviously they're living on less income than they could otherwise. These individuals then are not living up to their full potential, all because no one helped them as children to cope with the bully. So who knows what invention, innovation, other creative idea or product has never been created because of the consequence of bullying abuse. Current practices teach children that bullying is okay. This current hands-off, non-involvement policy and practice of society, as well as many school boards and educators, teach children that it's okay because they get away with it. In case you've forgotten principle number 1 from Psych 101, I'm going to teach it to you again. Or maybe you've used it in your toilet training of your children or your dog. The fundamental principle, and this is how I teach my clients. I have charts, just like you have charts, and I have handouts, and this is one of the charts that I use. We learn from the consequences or outcomes of our behavior. So if the outcome is positive, upper left-hand corner, the behavior will tend to be repeated. But if the outcome is negative, it's experienced as a punishment, and the animal, whether it's the dog, the toddler, or the child, or the adult, will tend to repress that behavior. Of course, we try to repress certain behaviors, and we punish children and dogs. A corollary of this, then, is if a behavior is being repeated, then it must be being perceived by that individual as a positive outcome. So bullying, it keeps being repeated and is on the increase. Because when I was teaching 50 years ago, I don't remember any incidents of bullying like we're talking about these days. I do remember one child in my class who was a little bit different. Physically, his face was different, and he was not as academically oriented as the others, and some of the other children began picking on him. When I learned about it, I, as the teacher, intervened and lectured the class to emphasize the fact that this young man had artistic talents way beyond most of the other children in the class. So I was picking out something that they could admire and would not allow them to behave in a negative way. So I, as the teacher, took it as my responsibility to negatively sanction those bullying behaviors and to hold him up in some fashion so that he would have some positive self-esteem. So if a behavior is being repeated, the individual is somehow is perceiving it as a reward. So if we want to change the behavior, we have to create it as some kind of a negative outcome. Fundamental principle number 1 that we are violating. coming here on the plane, I tore out of Time magazine a letter to the editor. They were referring to the South Hadley issue. Children learn what they see. The current climate in our country is one of pervasive bullying, from tea parties to TV talk shows to venomous tirades by radio hosts. Incivility and disrespect have never been more widespread. It's time we put a halt to it. That's the pervasive influence of society. No negative outcome equals a positive experience, equals a reward for the individual, and leads to the repetition of the behavior. Children learn what they live is a famous saying from a poster many parents have. I know it's one that I gave to my nephews and nieces when they had babies, so that they would remind them of that fact. I've added a second sentence to it myself based on what I teach my clients. Since children learn what they live, they then live what they learned. Because our brains get programmed, literally programmed like the computer. And in fact, I talk about the brain as analogous to the hard disk. Once it's programmed up there, you ain't gonna change it. All you're gonna be able to do is write a new program that interfaces with it to perhaps direct the behavior in a different direction. So the brain gets programmed by everything they see, hear, feel, taste, touch, and experience, every thought and emotion they have in conjunction with those experiences is absolutely, totally recorded in the brain, never goes anywhere. And then they live what they learned, because that's the blueprint that they have. So how they saw their mother and father relating to each other is how they are going to relate. That's why if you're dating somebody, you need to look at how that person treats his father or his mother, or her father and her mother, and how they treated each other, because that's what's programmed in that individual's brain, and that's what he or she is going to play out in their relationship with you. Cultural influences can be very subtle. For example, on shows like Hannah Montana, a very popular show among tweens and teens, you see one kid rolling her eyes at her parents and everyone laughs. Since children take things literally, they're perceiving this as, if I roll my eyes, then people will think I'm funny. If I make fun of my classmates, people will laugh. There's the positive reinforcement. How many parents watch these shows with their children and discuss these kinds of behaviors to teach their children that this is not the way to behave? Without that instruction, children have learned to roll their eyes, to ridicule others. And here you have the famous diagram. This is the diagram that I showed the dean 3 or 4 years ago that intrigued her enough to invite me to present a lecture a year and a half ago. And it summarizes my views of this whole problem. So I would like you to take that out, and I'm going to guide you in how to read it. The trunk of the tree, as you see, is bullying, and then more recently I added the child abuse part to it. Bullying roots come out of the family, society, and of course the individual interacting in those places. So the roots at the base of the tree show that indeed children learn what they live. Please note that the printing is in 2 different directions. That on the left-hand side of the roots, with the capital letter down at the bottom of the label, these are individual causes or factors of bullying behavior, such as parental neglect, blaming others, lack of conflict resolution skills, inadequate social skills, Those are the individual factors that feed into the bullying behavior. In the middle and on the right-hand side, with the capital letters at the top of the label itself, are the societal causes. Early exposure to violence in the home and or in the community, TV shows showing violence, showing no negative consequences to the violence, this onslaught of video and computer games now. In fact, the headline in the newspaper today is some California company wants to appeal on First Amendment rights, the right to market an exceedingly violent video game aimed at minors. We are teaching children to be violent. They're playing these games, and the games have to get more and more violent in order to attract customers. The sports have to get more and more violent in order to attract the audience. The society has gotten more and more violent as we go along because we are allowing it. The parents are allowing it by buying it and so forth. So those factors are primary factors. In fact, my previous address on this was 3 steps to ending school violence, and the school violence is merely an outgrowth of the societal violence that we are talking about here. In addition to all of that, we have in the middle the conformity pressures. Nowadays, you have to be like everybody else. If everyone's wearing Nike, you need to wear it, and you have to dress like everyone. I had a client who was a Vietnamese American, and when she was in high school, she was bullied for being different culturally and physically, and she never learned had developed the social skills to make friends. I saw her when she was a student at U of I in her college program. She still didn't have the skills to make friends, and she has developed an eating disorder because of the anxiety and the depression. All of it stems from the high school bullying, where the social skills she should have learned, she never did. So these conformity pressures are one of the things that need to be altered. And of course, gun availability, that leads to the school violence part of it. Obviously, not all kids are going to engage in that. Okay, so those are the roots of the problem. That leads to the bullying and the child abuse. And at the top of the tree, we have the consequences for the next generation. On the left, we have the consequences for the bullied victim is pain throughout their adulthood. And once again, the labels are printed in 2 different directions, so that the labels with the capital letter at the top are the individual consequences for the victim. As you see, it's depression, and most seriously, school violence, and out of the depression comes isolation, peer rejection, etc. And on the right-hand side of the tree with the capital letter at the bottom of the label, the consequences for the bully is that they will more likely engage in criminal behavior, in various forms of domestic violence, including child abuse, physical, verbal, and emotional, employee abuse, anger and rage, elder abuse, and so forth. And I quoted you the statistic from before, the increased likelihood of them engaging in criminal behavior. So the view of many parents, society, and educators has been that it's normal and natural. And as a result, the current thinking about the solution is that they have to be able to defend themselves, stand up for themselves, fight back, not be pushed around by anybody. And if they can't do that, then they deserve what they get. So Phoebe Snow was one of those weaklings who couldn't stand up to the pressure of the bullying that she received. But in a civilized society, we do not let the law of natural selection play out. In a civilized society, we protect the weak from being preyed upon. We spend great sums of money providing for special needs children, those that are deaf or blind or autistic or learning disabled or mentally retarded. We do that so they can live their lives to their fullest potential. Should we do anything less for those children preyed upon because of some perceived social difference? The current solution has resulted in the increases that we see. Things have changed for the worse. It used to be primarily one-on-one, and it was primarily boys, the alpha male seeking dominance, and it was primarily physical. It is now girls as well as boys. We now have alpha females. In fact, it was the alpha females who were attacking Phoebe. How dare she date one of their ex-boyfriends? It's now emotional as well as physical. And now it's 2 or 3 to 1, or 10 to 1 if it's cyberbullying. And how does one individual child handle that alone? And as you know, it's increasing. Things have changed. They continue to get worse, but the solutions have not changed. To continue to do the same thing and expect the outcome to be different is what? Crazy. Mental illness. Yes. This is what I teach my clients. Mental illness is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting the outcome to be different. We've been handling this problem in some of the same fashions forever. So here's my clinical background and my training as a scientist. And this is also what I teach my clients. You have to define the outcome that you want. Then you have to generate different inputs that you think might produce that outcome. You select one of those new inputs to experiment with. You design the experiment, implement the experiment, and evaluate the experiment. And that's what we're proposing here today. So I have several suggested experiments. First is change the language. That's what I'm talking about. That was number 1. Change the language used to refer to the problem to change people's understanding of the problem. And the reason we have to do that, because in my lifetime, I've seen the changes in people's attitudes that result from a mere word change. For example, in the 70s, anti-abortion became more palatable by calling it pro-life. Pro-abortion couldn't be outdone, so they changed the word to pro-choice. Until the 1980s, domestic violence was viewed by the public and the legal system as something private, and so the police kept hands off, and the police would do nothing unless the victim chose to press charges against the perpetrator. With the feminist influence, the laws were changed so that domestic violence was now defined as spousal abuse, child abuse, elder abuse. With that influence, with that change in vocabulary, people realized that it was abuse, and the people, police, and the legislators changed policies and laws so the, parentheses, usually women, now have help and legal recourse. And in fact, in Illinois, it's the police who charge the perpetrator. The victim doesn't have anything to say, so if there's evidence of abuse, the charges are placed by the state, not by the individual, because the state has now said, we will not tolerate abuse of anybody, but we do tolerate the abuse of children by other children. So the abused partner does not have to go it alone. They have the legal system on their side. Children don't have anybody on their side. Why should a child have to deal with an abuser by him or herself? So vocabulary changes lead to attitude changes, which then lead to behavior changes. And this is the crux of my presentation. This is when I noticed physical bullying, pushing, shoving, hitting, kicking, punching, tripping. If an adult did this to another adult, it would be considered assault and battery, and they would be charged and convicted on that basis. Stealing things is robbery when it's adult to adult. Knocking things from their hands, vandalizing things, those are all the physical bullying. Therefore, logic says if this physical bullying is assault and battery and robbery, and it's also considered physical abuse, because if an adult did any one of these things to another adult, they could be charged with physical abuse if it's a spouse, or if they were doing it to a child, they would be charged with child abuse. So if an adult doing this to a child is considered child abuse, why isn't a child doing it to a child considered child abuse? And we have the same thing with emotional bullying, teasing, name-calling, taunts, threats, ridicule, insults, spreading rumors, shunning, ostracism, saying mean things to the child or about the child. Again, if an adult did this to a child, it would be called child abuse. If they do it to an adult, it's called emotional abuse. So if a child is doing it to another child, or children are doing it to one child on Facebook or on the bus or in the school or anywhere else, why isn't that child abuse? Before we get to that, I want you to do a little experiment. Please close your eyes. I would like to take you through an exercise for a minute. Visualize a child that you know, either your own child, one in your class, or even Phoebe Prince. Imagine that you are that child, that you're the one being bullied. Every day, something happens to you. You're teased, taunted, ridiculed, have objects thrown at you. You read the terrible things that they write on Facebook. And think about the fact that you have no one to turn to help you. You can't get away from it. You can't change it. Now go inside yourself. How does it feel to you to be that victim? Do you feel helpless? Hopeless? Powerless? Does it feel abusive? And you have no one to turn to? Is it child abuse? And when you're ready, you may open your eyes again. Suggested experiment number 2. I've already alluded to this. We could impose negative consequences so that the children learn that bullying, abuse will not be tolerated. And by the way, I've altered the wording a bit because I want to get the word abuse hinged to the word bullying. So I've begun just in the last couple of weeks to call it bullying abuse, so that we don't lose the word bullying, but we hook it up to the abuse concept. So we need to call it bullying abuse, and it will not be tolerated. The third experiment would be to change the law, and this may be somewhat controversial. In Illinois, I, as a therapist, and all of the teachers are mandated by law to report any abuse, child, spousal, or elder, to appropriate legal authorities. Even the confidentiality requirements that I practice under, that we are given under the law, are waived in the event that I find out that there is any kind of abuse going on. So and I don't know whether that applies in New York State. So one experiment would be to get the laws changed to mandate that teachers report any knowledge of bullying incidents to the administration. And supposedly in Massachusetts, some of the teachers did try to do that. But then we also have to mandate that the administrators investigate all those incidents thoroughly and intervene in some appropriate fashion, or report them to, and you would have to devise some appropriate next steps that would be appropriate. I obviously am not an attorney, and I can't define what that is, but we could get the legal scholars involved in order to do that. So if teachers had to report it and the administration had to investigate every one of those incidents, and if 1 in 3 children are being abused, I think the principal's hands are going to be pretty full. So my strong hunch is that if this were enacted, then the school boards and administration would soon develop the curricula and the policies that would support diversity and differences and encourage children to tolerate those differences, and that those policies would also punish the bully abusers, lest the administrators have to spend all of their time investigating these bullying incidents and not get anything else done, or they would be subject to legal prosecution if nothing was done to prevent the bullying. We have no basis for, I guess the district attorney in Massachusetts had no basis for charging the neglectful administration there. So we charge the children, but we don't charge the adults. Yes, I'm just finished. Bullying abuse is child abuse by children. If we don't allow abuse by adults, why do we allow it by children? Where they thereby learn that behavior. How far over did I go? 15.